Missouri sits at the center of the continental United States in a way that is not just geographical. The Missouri River and the Mississippi River meet here. The Ozark Plateau lifts out of the south. The northern plains begin just past the upper counties. The state shares a border with 8 others, more than any state except Tennessee. That alone tells you something about what Missouri has always been. A crossing point, a handoff, a place where one thing becomes another. Era Trails covers places the way they actually are, through their geology, their ecology, their long human record. Missouri gives us all of that in a concentrated form. The Ozarks are among the oldest exposed landscapes in North America. The caves here number in the thousands. The rivers have cut gorges through billion-year-old rock. And the human record runs from Osage settlements to the edge of the Civil War to ragtime piano, drifting out of a 2-room house in St. Louis. We move roughly south and west from St. Louis, then loop through the central prairies and river counties before coming back through the Ozarks. 13 stops, each one geologically, ecologically, or historically distinct enough that you would not mistake one for another. The oldest rock we will stand on is approximately 1.5 billion years old. The newest is the Gateway Arch, completed in 1965. We start at the Mississippi River, at the foot of the tallest monument in the country. The Gateway Arch stands 630 feet tall on the west bank of the Mississippi River in St. Louis. It is the tallest monument in the United States and the tallest stainless steel structure in the world. The arch is not a perfect semicircle, it is a weighted catenary curve, the shape a hanging chain makes under its own gravity when inverted. That shape distributes structural load more efficiently than a semicircle would. The engineers chose it because it works, not because it looks dramatic. Each of the arch's 2 legs is a hollow equilateral triangle at the base, tapering as it rises. The outer skin is stainless steel. Inside, a tram system carries visitors to the observation deck at the top. The ride takes 4 minutes, and the tram cars rotate to stay level as the angle of the arch shifts. From 630 feet, the view covers 30 miles in clear conditions. Below, the Mississippi is moving south at roughly 1.2 miles per hour during average flow, though it climbs to more than 3 miles per hour in flood stage. The river here is between 1,500 and 2,000 feet wide. The park occupies ground that was the original St. Louis riverfront, established by French-Canadian fur traders Pierre Laclede and Auguste Chouteau in 1764. They chose the site because of a natural limestone shelf that kept it above flood level, a rare feature along this stretch. The arch sits where the old warehouses and docks once stood, cleared in a massive mid-century urban renewal project that displaced the existing neighborhood. That history is documented in the Museum of Westward Expansion beneath the arch. The exhibits cover Lewis and Clark, Osage and other tribal nations whose territories overlapped with the frontier, and the mechanics of 19th century westward migration. The museum is embedded in the arch's foundation. You descend into it underground, with the full weight of 630 feet of steel overhead. The geology underfoot is Mississippi embayment sediment layered over Paleozoic limestone, deposited when a shallow inland sea covered this region roughly 300 million years ago. That limestone is what gave the original settlers their flood-free shelf. The river itself is cutting down through those sediment layers continuously. The Mississippi moves approximately 500 million tons of sediment annually into the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi Flyway passes directly over St. Louis, one of the 4 major North American bird migration corridors. Bald eagles winter along the river here in numbers that can exceed 2,000 birds between November and March, drawn by open water and fish concentrations below the Melvin Price locks and dam upstream. Standing on the riverbank in January, you can see them perched in cottonwoods along the opposite bank, 5 or 6 visible at a time without binoculars. St. Louis grew around this riverfront. In the 1840s and 1850s, it was briefly the second largest city in the country by commerce volume, processing the freight of the expanding interior. The arch project was designed by Eero Saarinen, selected in a 1947 competition that drew 172 entries. Construction ran from 1963 to 1965. The 2 legs were built from opposite sides and met at the top within 1/64th of an inch of the calculated alignment. That precision required surveying adjustments throughout construction as the steel expanded and contracted with daily temperature changes. From the arch's base, the old courthouse is visible to the west, a federal building that hosted early hearings in Dred Scott's freedom lawsuit in 1847 before the case moved to the U.S. Supreme Court. The building is now part of the National Park system. We leave the Mississippi River behind and move northwest through the city grid into the Compton Hill neighborhood, where a 2-story brick house on Del Mar Boulevard holds the living record of one of American music's most consequential careers. Scott Joplin lived at 2658A Del Mar Boulevard in St. Louis between 1900 and 1903. The house is a 2-story brick row house, one of several attached units in a working-class neighborhood that was, at the turn of the 20th century, a center of African-American cultural life in the city. Joplin rented the second-floor apartment. The rooms are small. The parlor where he composed at the upright piano is roughly 12 by 14 feet. The piano is period accurate, not original. The floor plan has not changed. During the years he lived here, Joplin completed and published Maple Leaf Rag, The Entertainer, and more than 20 additional rags. Maple Leaf Rag was published in 1899, just before he moved in, by Sedalia publisher John Stark. The contract gave Joplin a penny per copy, which was a standard royalty at the time. The sheet music sold 400 copies in the first 6 months, then accelerated. Within a year, it had sold over 75,000 copies, which made it one of the first pieces of American sheet music to reach that figure. Joplin earned enough to live without taking regular work for several years. Ragtime is a formally specific genre. The left hand plays a steady, march-like bass pattern. The right hand plays a syncopated melody that consistently falls off the beat. Joplin's contribution was structural rigor. His rags have multiple distinct sections, each 16 bars, with precise dynamic and harmonic contrast between them. He treated the form the way a classical composer would treat a sonata. The Scott Joplin House now functions as a state historic site with period furnishings and exhibit panels, but the primary interpretive element is the music itself, which plays throughout the building. The neighborhood context matters. Delmar Boulevard runs through what was called the Chestnut Valley Entertainment District, a corridor of saloons, dance halls, and theaters that employed black musicians across the city. Joplin was not working in isolation. He was part of a professional network that included composers, publishers, and performers circulating between St. Louis, Sedalia, and Kansas City. The ragtime scene those cities produced between 1895 and 1910 was the direct precursor to jazz. The harmonic and rhythmic vocabulary Joplin codified at this piano traveled into every major American popular music form that followed. The brick itself is common bond pattern, alternating rows of headers and stretchers, standard St. Louis construction for this period. The city had brick manufacturing infrastructure going back to the 1840s, using local clay deposits along the Missouri River tributaries. The house survived largely because the neighborhood did not gentrify or demolish on the timeline that cleared other areas. It was designated a state historic site in 1991 and opened for public tours. Joplin left St. Louis in 1903 and spent his later years in New York, where he completed the opera Treemonisha, which was not performed in full during his lifetime. He died in 1917. The Pulitzer Prize Board awarded him a special posthumous Pulitzer in 1976, nearly 60 years after his death, specifically for his contributions to American music. From Delmar Boulevard, we head south and east, dropping toward the Mississippi again, this time in the oldest permanent European settlement in Missouri, a town that was already 40 years old when the United States existed. Sainte Genevieve sits on the west bank of the Mississippi River, approximately 60 miles south of St. Louis. French-Canadian settlers established it around 1735, making it the oldest permanent European settlement in Missouri and one of the oldest west of the Mississippi. The town was originally built closer to the river, on the floodplain. A series of major floods in the 1780s prompted a full relocation of the settlement approximately 3 miles inland and to higher ground. That rebuilt town is what still stands. Several of the structures relocated with it. The most significant buildings in Sainte Geneviève are vertical log construction, poteaux en terre and poteaux sur sol, meaning posts set directly in the ground or posts set on a ground sill. Both techniques were brought from French colonial building traditions in Canada and adapted to Mississippi Valley conditions. The Bolduc House, built around 1770, is one of the best preserved examples of this construction method in North America. The walls are cedar logs set vertically and packed with a mixture of clay, limestone, and animal hair, called bouselage, that functions as both insulation and fill. The roof extends past the walls to create a covered porch that wraps the structure on multiple sides, a design feature that manages summer heat and provides covered working space. The interior ceiling height is low by modern standards, roughly 7 feet, and the floor plan reflects a layout common to 18th century French colonial domestic life, with a large central room flanked by smaller sleeping chambers. The geology under Sainte-Geneviève is Mississippian limestone, the same marine sedimentary formation that underlies much of the Ozark region. The Mississippi River here runs between high limestone bluffs on the Illinois side and gentler terrain on the Missouri side, which is why the French built on the west bank. The bluffs across the river rise to 300 feet and are clearly visible from the town. The surrounding uplands hold one of the more unusual botanical communities in Missouri, a glade ecosystem on thin-soiled limestone outcrops where prairie plants and even some plants of southeastern origin grow within a few feet of Ozark woodland species. The eastern collared lizard is common on these glades, a species more typical of the Southwest that reaches its northeastern range limit in the Missouri limestone glades. It is fast, iridescent green and orange on the male, and can run bipedally on its hind legs. Sainte-Geneviève was part of the Illinois country under French colonial administration, then passed to Spain in 1762, then briefly back to France in 1800, before the Louisiana Purchase transferred the entire region to the United States in 1803. The town's population in the 1790s was approximately 1,000 people, including enslaved African Americans, who made up roughly a third of the population and provided the labor for the lead mining and agricultural economy. That history is documented in the Sainte-Geneviève National Historical Park Visitor Center, which opened in 2020 and is integrated into the historic district rather than set apart from it. The Sainte-Geneviève-Kaskaskia Ferry still crosses the Mississippi here, one of the last remaining ferry crossings on the upper river, running a route that has existed in some form since the 18th century. From Sainte-Geneviève, we turn northwest, away from the Mississippi, and into the rolling terrain of western Missouri, where a hemp rope and a cannonball together tell a specific story about a single afternoon in 1864. The Battle of Lexington took place on September 18th to 20th, 1861, in the town of Lexington on the south bank of the Missouri River, roughly 40 miles east of Kansas City. Confederate forces under General Sterling Price, numbering approximately 12,000 men, besieged a Union garrison of about 2,800 inside the grounds of the Masonic College. The Union commander was Colonel James Mulligan. The siege lasted 3 days. What ended it was water. The Confederates advanced behind hemp bales soaked in the river, rolling them forward as mobile cover. Hemp grown in the Missouri River Valley was one of the state's primary commercial crops before the war. Wet hemp bales absorb bullets without igniting. The tactic worked. Mulligan's men ran out of water on the third day. The Confederates had cut the supply line and surrendered. The Union forces were paroled rather than imprisoned, a common early war practice. The site today preserves the Anderson House, a two-story antebellum brick structure that served as a field hospital during the battle. A cannonball is still embedded in one of its columns, exactly where it lodged in 1861. The brick is a mid-19th century common bond, locally fired, and the impact damage to the surrounding masonry is visible. The house changed hands repeatedly during the battle, used first by Confederate surgeons, then Union, then Confederate again, as the lines shifted. Lexington sits in the Missouri River Valley at an elevation of approximately 850 feet. The surrounding terrain is glaciated till plain. The Missouri River here marks roughly the southern extent of the Pleistocene glacial advance into Missouri. North of the river, the land was scoured and leveled by glaciers. South of the river, the terrain is older, more irregular, Ozark influenced. That difference shows up in soil composition. The northern glacial till is deep and exceptionally fertile, which is why the Missouri River counties became the state's agricultural heartland before the Civil War. Hemp cultivation in that valley required intensive labor. Enslaved people processed the majority of the crop, breaking, retting, and hackling the fiber. Lexington was a pro-slavery stronghold, and Lafayette County, where it sits, had one of the highest proportions of enslaved population in the state in 1860. Approximately 6,600 enslaved people in a total county population of around 21,000. The battle was, in that context, not just a military engagement, but a contest over which economic and social system would govern the region. The Lexington Historical Museum, housed in a former courthouse downtown, holds artifacts from the battle period, including weapons, uniforms, and documents from both sides. The courthouse building dates to 1847 and is one of the older public structures surviving in western Missouri. White-tailed deer are numerous in the wooded river bottom land around the site. Wild turkey move through the upland fields at dawn. The Missouri River here is wide and brown, carrying its characteristic heavy sediment load. The river moves approximately 200 million tons of suspended sediment per year through this stretch, far more than the Mississippi does at equivalent flow. From the Missouri River Valley, we move northeast into Clay County, where a set of brick buildings along a small stream represent one of the more complete surviving records of 19th century American industrial rural life. The Watkins Woolen Mill in Lawson, Missouri, is the only 19th century American woolen mill with its original machinery still in place. That is not a general preservation claim, it is a specific physical fact. The carding machines, the spinning frames, the power looms, and the finishing equipment are all there, largely in the condition they were in when the mill stopped operating in 1898. The building is a 4-story brick structure built in 1861 by Waltus Watkins, a farmer and entrepreneur who ran a diversified agricultural operation on 3,600 acres of Clay County land. The mill ran on water power from Brush Creek, which was dammed upstream to create a mill pond. The machinery was driven by a central shaft that ran the length of the building, powered by a turbine wheel in the basement. Individual machines connected to the shaft via leather belt drives. The noise level when the machinery ran was measured in accounts from workers at the time as loud enough to require shouting to communicate across the floor. Watkins grew his own wool. The farm ran approximately 1,000 sheep at its peak. Raw fleece came in at one end of the process, and finished cloth came out the other. The mill produced flannel, jeans cloth, and casimere, a twill weave used for men's suiting. The Watkins family also operated a church, a school, and a general store on the property, creating a self-contained community of workers and their families who lived in houses clustered around the mill complex. Those houses are gone. The mill building and the Watkins farmhouse, a substantial brick Italianate structure built in 1850, remain. The brick used throughout the complex is locally fired from clay deposits along Brush Creek. The mill walls are 18 inches thick at the base, tapering as the building rises, which provides thermal mass and structural stability. In summer, the interior stays noticeably cooler than outside. In winter, the machinery itself generated enough heat that workers reported the lower floors staying warm through operation. Clay County sits on that glacial till plain north of the Missouri River, deep, flat, fertile ground that made large-scale sheep farming possible. The grass here grows thick and recovers fast. The winters are cold, but not extreme by northern standards. Those conditions suited wool production. By the time the mill closed, 1898, industrial-scale mills in New England and the Midwest were producing cloth at prices the Watkins mill could not match. The machinery stopped. The family kept the property. Eastern meadowlarks nest in the surrounding grasslands. Their call is a descending two-note whistle, clear and carrying. Northern bobwhite are present in the brushy field edges, their three-note call audible from inside the mill building through the open windows in breeding season. The mill was donated to the state of Missouri in 1964 and is now a state historic site operating regular tours. The machinery is occasionally operated for demonstration. The belts move, the shafts turn, and the carding drums rotate, which gives a direct sense of the speed and scale of the original operation in a way that static display cannot. From Clay County, we head south along the Missouri River to one of the most strategically located small towns in American history. A place that outfitters, politicians, artists, and historians have all passed through for different reasons. Arrow Rock sits on a limestone bluff above the south bank of the Missouri River in Saline County, approximately 100 miles east of Kansas City. The town had a population of roughly 1,000 in the 1840s and is down to fewer than 60 permanent residents today. The buildings are still there, the population is not. The site was significant before the town existed. Osage and other tribal nations used the flint outcrops at the river crossing for tool production. Arrow points and scrapers made from arrow rock flint have been identified at archaeological sites across the central Great Plains. Lewis and Clark noted the bluff in their 1804 journals. The Santa Fe Trail used the Arrow Rock ferry crossing as one of its primary Missouri River departure points after 1821. Traders heading southwest to Santa Fe loaded wagons here, crossed the river, and turned west into the open prairie. The town itself grew from the 1820s onward. The J. Houston Tavern, built in 1834, is the oldest continuously operating restaurant west of the Mississippi River. It still serves food. The building is a two-story Federal-style brick structure with a wide front porch. The interior has low ceilings and narrow stairs, proportions that reflect both the building materials available and the physical dimensions of furniture and bodies in the 1830s. The menu has changed, the floor plan has not. George Caleb Bingham lived in Arrow Rock and used the town's residents as subjects for his paintings of Missouri River frontier life. Fur traders descending the Missouri, the Jolly Flatboatman, and his election series were all produced during his years here. His house, a modest Federal-style structure, is preserved on the main street. Bingham also served in the Missouri State Legislature and later as state treasurer, operating simultaneously as a working artist and a public official, an unusual combination that his contemporaries apparently found unremarkable. The limestone bluff above the river is Pennsylvanian-age carbonate rock, formed approximately 300 million years ago in a shallow tropical sea. The flint that made Arrow Rock valuable for tool production is chert, microcrystalline quartz that forms in nodules within the limestone as silica-rich water moves through the rock. Chert fractures conchoidally, meaning it breaks in smooth, curved surfaces that can be shaped into sharp edges. The Osage knew this. The tool production record at the site goes back at least 10,000 years. The surrounding woodland is Missouri River bottom forest, cottonwood, silver maple, and sycamore on the low ground near the water, transitioning to oak and hickory on the bluff top. Wood ducks use the river corridor. The male's call is a rising whistle audible from the bluff at dawn. Beaver work the creek mouths where tributaries enter the Missouri, and their cuttings, gnawed stumps, pale and fresh-looking, show up along the bank trails throughout spring and summer. The Arrow Rock State Historic Site preserves a cluster of 19th-century structures, including the tavern, a gunsmith shop, a print shop, and a small courthouse, most of them within a 2-block area. The Friends of Arrow Rock, a preservation nonprofit, has operated continuous restoration work here since 1959. Without that effort, the buildings would not be standing. Small towns with declining populations do not preserve themselves. From the Missouri River bluff at Arrow Rock, we turn south. The terrain changes quickly. The flat glacial plain gives way to rougher, older ground. As we cross into the Ozark Plateau, prairie opens ahead of us, and the grass is not the managed kind. Prairie State Park preserves approximately 4,000 acres of tall grass prairie in Barton County in the southwestern corner of Missouri, near the town of Liberal. Before European settlement, tall grass prairie covered roughly 15 million acres of Missouri. Less than 1% of that original extent survives in anything close to intact condition. This is the largest remaining piece of it in the state. Tallgrass prairie is not a simple plant community. The Prairie State Park site supports more than 300 native plant species, and the root systems of the dominant grasses, big bluestem, Indian grass, and switchgrass, extend 10 to 15 feet into the soil. The above-ground portion of these plants is roughly 1/3 of their total mass. The underground portion builds soil carbon over centuries. The black topsoil of the Midwest is largely the product of those root systems decomposing over thousands of years. The park manages the prairie through a combination of prescribed fire and American bison. The bison herd here numbers approximately 100 animals and is confined to a fenced management area within the park. Bison graze selectively, they prefer grasses over forbs, and their grazing pressure creates short grass patches within the taller matrix, increasing plant diversity by opening ground for species that cannot compete in dense, tall grass. Their wallows, depressions worn into bare soil by rolling behavior, collect rainwater and create temporary wetland habitat used by invertebrates and birds. The smell of the herd is distinct and carries a thick, musky animal smell unlike cattle, noticeable from 200 yards downwind. Greater prairie chickens persist in small numbers at this site, one of the last viable populations in Missouri. In early spring, males gather on traditional display grounds called lecks before dawn and perform a booming display. Inflating orange air sacs on the sides of the neck, stamping their feet rapidly, and producing a low resonant call that carries far across flat ground. The sound is 3 syllables, hollow and carrying, audible at distances over a mile in calm conditions. The species requires large, intact prairie tracts to maintain populations. Fragmented grassland does not support stable leaks. Dickcissels are abundant in the tall grass through summer, the males delivering their flat, buzzy song from the tops of bluestem stalks. Upland sandpipers nest on the ground in the open grass, their long necks visible above the vegetation when they stand up to survey territory. Both species are grassland obligates. They do not use agricultural land or fragmented habitat effectively, which is why prairie preservation and their population health are directly linked. The underlying geology is Pennsylvanian-age shale and limestone, the same formation that runs through much of western Missouri. The flatness of the terrain here reflects both the rock type and the erosional history. This corner of Missouri was not glaciated, but the land is old and worn nearly level by long erosion. Springs emerge where shale layers create impermeable surfaces, and the wet weather streams that run through the park carry that slightly alkaline, limestone-filtered water. The Osage Nation used this prairie for bison hunting well into the 19th century. Euro-American settlement converted the land to agriculture beginning in the 1880s and 1890s. The remaining prairie fragments survived because the soil in their specific locations was too thin, too wet, or too rocky for reliable crop production. This site was acquired by the state starting in the 1970s and has been under active restoration management since, including the reintroduction of bison in 1982. We leave the open sky of Barton County and head east and south into the Ozarks, where the land folds up and the geology goes deep. The first stop is underground. Merrimack Caverns sit beneath the Ozark Plateau near Stanton, Missouri, in Franklin County, approximately 60 miles southwest of St. Louis. The cave complex extends through at least 4.6 miles of surveyed passage, with 5 distinct levels of development reflecting different periods of formation. It is one of the most visited caves in Missouri, which is a competitive field. The state has more than 6,000 recorded caves. The cave formed in Gasconade dolomite, a Ordovician-age carbonate rock approximately 480 million years old. Dolomite is chemically similar to limestone, but with magnesium substituting for some of the calcium in the mineral structure. It dissolves slightly more slowly than pure limestone, which produces a different texture of cave passage, smoother walls, rounder forms, compared to the angular breakdown typical of some limestone caves. The Merrimack River runs just outside the cave entrance and has historically flooded the lower passages, which is why the cave's lower levels are partly water-scoured and partly decorated with flowstone deposited after each flood recedes. The cave's most visually prominent feature is a multi-tiered flowstone formation called the Wine Table, a broad, flat-topped calcite deposit formed by water sheeting evenly across a horizontal surface over tens of thousands of years. The formation is approximately 60 feet wide. Calcite deposits form when water saturated with dissolved calcium carbonate reaches air, carbon dioxide off gases, the water becomes supersaturated, and calcium carbonate precipitates out. The rate of growth for most formations in this cave is measured in fractions of an inch per century. The cave also contains large stalactite and stalagmite formations, cave coral and rimstone pools, shallow basins of standing water rimmed by calcite ridges that built up as water evaporated from successive pool surfaces. The cave temperature holds at approximately 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, which feels cold in summer and warm in winter relative to outside conditions. The air smells of mineral water and damp rock. Ozark big-eared bats and gray bats roost in Missouri caves. Both species are federally listed. Gray bats are obligate cave users for both hibernation and summer colony formation, and Missouri's cave systems support some of the largest remaining colonies. A single hibernating colony can number in the hundreds of thousands. The noise of a large bat colony emerging at dusk, a rushing, papery, continuous sound, carries out of a cave entrance before the animals are visible. Jesse James reportedly used Merrimack Caverns as a hideout in the 1870s. The claim is documented well enough to be local legend and loosely enough to be marketing. The cave was commercially developed beginning in the 1930s under promoter Lester Dill, who also originated the practice of putting bumper stickers on visitor cars without asking, a marketing technique that spread from this cave to the wider commercial landscape. The Merrimack River outside the cave is a federally designated scenic river, running clear and cold over gravel bars lined with sycamore and river birch. From Merrimack Caverns, we stay underground, or rather, we find a different underground a short distance away, one that trades commercial development for a more complete picture of what Ozark cave systems actually contain. Onondaga Cave lies within Onondaga Cave State Park near Leesburg, Missouri, in Crawford County. The cave is a National Natural Landmark designated in 1970. The main passage runs approximately 1 mile and contains some of the most dense and varied speleothem formations in Missouri in a relatively compact space. Stalactites, stalagmites, columns, soda straws, cave coral, cave pearls, and helictites occurring within short distances of one another. The helictites here are particularly notable. They are small, twisted calcite formations that grow in directions that appear to defy gravity, horizontally, upward at angles, in spiraling curves. The mechanism is not fully settled in the literature, but the primary explanation is hydrostatic pressure. Water moves through capillary-sized passages in the calcite under pressure and deposits mineral at the tip regardless of gravitational orientation. Some helictites at Onondaga are only a few millimeters in diameter and extend several inches in complex curves. They are fragile enough to be destroyed by a breath of air at close range. The cave formed in Gasconade dolomite, the same Ordovician Age formation underlying Meramec caverns, approximately 480 million years old. The Meramec River drainage basin covers both cave systems. Water moves through the surface landscape, enters the karst through sinkholes, travels through cave passages, and reemerges in springs. Onondaga Spring, which flows out of the cave system, discharges approximately 12 million gallons of water per day under normal conditions. The spring feeds directly into the Meramec River just outside the park boundary. Cave crayfish inhabit the cave streams here. They are white, eyeless, and move slowly through the water. Eyes are metabolically expensive tissue in permanent darkness. Species that have inhabited caves for sufficient generations consistently lose them through selective pressure. The cave crayfish's antennae are proportionally longer than surface-dwelling relatives, compensating for lost vision with enhanced mechanoreception. The water they live in is cold, approximately 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and low in nutrients. Cave aquatic systems are oligotrophic. The primary food input is organic matter washed in from the surface, and the food web is correspondingly simple. The park above the cave is Ozark woodland, a mixed forest of white oak, black oak, shortleaf pine, and eastern red cedar on the upland terrain, with river birch, sycamore, and cottonwood along the Meramec River corridor. Eastern hellbender live in the river, the largest salamander in North America, reaching up to 29 inches in length. They live under large flat rocks, in well-oxygenated, cold, clear streams, and breathe almost entirely through their skin. Water quality degradation, sedimentation, and warming is the primary threat to their persistence. Crawford County populations are monitored annually. The cave was commercially operated in the 1920s and 1930s before being acquired by the state. The commercial-era lighting infrastructure was removed after state acquisition, and current lighting is designed to minimize algae growth on the formations. A second cave on the property, Cathedral Cave, requires a separate guided tour and includes passages that require crawling. The two caves represent different formation styles within the same geological unit. Below us, the karst system continues south into the heart of the Ozarks, and above it, a lake occupies a castle ruin on a dolomite peninsula in one of the more visually improbable landscapes in Missouri. Ha Tonka State Park covers approximately 3,720 acres around the shoreline of the Lake of the Ozarks in Camden County near Camdenton. The park's defining feature is the ruin of a stone mansion begun by Kansas City businessman Robert Snyder around 1905 and never completed. Snyder died in one of Missouri's first automobile accidents in 1906, and the structure passed through several owners before burning in 1942. The stone walls remain, rising 3 and 4 stories over a dolomite bluff with a 200-foot vertical drop to the Lake of the Ozarks below. The view from the ruins' empty window frames covers several miles of lake and forest. The geological setting is karst on an intensive scale. Ha Tonka Spring, which flows at approximately 48 million gallons per day, is one of the largest springs in Missouri and feeds a spring branch that runs through a natural bridge before emptying into the lake. The natural bridge spans approximately 60 feet and is 100 feet high. It formed when the roof of a cave passage collapsed, except at one point, leaving the arch. The cave system beneath the park includes Ha Tonka Cave, accessible from the park, which shows the active speleogenesis still occurring in the Ozark karst. The name Ha Tonka translates roughly from Osage as laughing waters or smiling waters, the sound of the spring flow over rock. The Osage used the spring and the surrounding valley well before Euro-American settlement. The landscape here sits in the Lake of the Ozarks watershed, a reservoir created in 1931 by Bagnell Dam on the Osage River, which flooded approximately 65,000 acres of Ozark Valley. The lake's irregular shoreline, approximately 1,150 miles of it, reflects the drowned topography of the original river valley and its tributaries. The woodland at Ha Tonka is characteristic Ozark dry slope forest, post oak, blackjack oak, and eastern red cedar on the thin, rocky, south-facing slopes above the lake. The dolomite glades, open rocky outcrops within the forest, support prairie species that persist because the thin soil and reflected heat of the rock create conditions that woodland cannot colonize. Eastern collared lizards are common on these glades, along with fence lizards and six-lined race runners, which are fast enough that they are more often heard than seen. A quick rustle in dry leaves, then nothing. Wild turkeys move through the oak woodland in the mornings, scratching through leaf litter for acorns. Great blue herons stand in the spring branch below the natural bridge. The spring water emerges at a constant 58 degrees Fahrenheit and runs clear over gravel and watercress. The temperature differential between the spring branch and the surrounding air in summer, sometimes 30 degrees, produces visible mist on cool mornings. The Snyder Mansion ruin is stabilized but not restored. The masonry is Ozark dolomite, locally quarried, and the construction quality is high. The walls that remain show careful coursing and tight joints. What finished the building was not structural failure but fire, then abandonment. The chimneys still stand. The kitchen wing walls still have their window openings. The tower at the north end still reaches its original height. From the ruined castle above the Lake of the Ozarks, we move east and slightly south into some of the most geologically unusual terrain in the state, a place where a Precambrian volcanic event left a mark still completely visible at the surface. Johnson's Shut-ins State Park sits in Reynolds County in the eastern Ozarks near the town of Lesterville. The Black River here runs through a series of gorges cut into the oldest exposed rock in Missouri. Rhyolite and granite from the St. Francois Mountains, approximately 1.5 billion years old. The shut-ins are places where the river has been squeezed, shut in, between walls of this ancient volcanic rock, creating a series of chutes, pools, and carved channels that extend for about 1,000 feet along the river corridor. The rhyolite here is the product of massive volcanic eruptions that built a mountain range during the Proterozoic eon, roughly 1.47 to 1.5 billion years ago. Those mountains were eroded nearly to sea level over hundreds of millions of years, buried under younger sediment and then re-exposed by Ozark uplift and erosion. What the Black River is cutting through is not recent rock. It is the Precambrian basement of the continent, the same geological foundation that underlies almost all of North America, but is almost everywhere buried under younger deposits. Here it is at the surface, and you can put your hands on it. The rock is hard and pink-red to gray in color, with a fine-grained texture that reflects rapid cooling of volcanic material. In the river channel, centuries of water and sand have polished it smooth. The pools between the chutes are clear and cold. The Black River here drains largely forested watershed with minimal agricultural input, so the water clarity is exceptional. Visibility in the deeper pools can exceed 10 feet. The rock surfaces above the waterline are warm to the touch on summer afternoons. The rhyolite absorbs and holds heat. In December 2005, a catastrophic failure of the Taum Sauk Reservoir, a pumped storage facility on Prophet Mountain, approximately 4 miles upstream, released approximately 1.3 billion gallons of water in about 25 minutes. The flood scoured the shut-ins, stripped the riverbanks, and destroyed the park's campground and visitor infrastructure. The water reached depths of 20 feet above normal river level in the gorge. The park was closed for 4 years during restoration. The flood also stripped vegetation from the valley walls, which allowed detailed study of the rock formations that had been obscured by plant growth. The rebuilt facilities opened in 2009. Smallmouth bass are the primary sport fish in the Black River. The cold, clear, well-oxygenated water suits them. Ozark hellgrammites, the larval stage of the eastern Dobson fly, live under rocks in the swift sections, clinging against the current with multiple pairs of legs. They are 2 to 3 inches long, dark brown, and used as bait by local anglers. Louisiana water thrushes nest along the stream banks, walking and bobbing along the wet rocks at the water's edge. Their song is a loud, cascading series of notes that cuts through the sound of moving water. The surrounding Ozark woodland is shortleaf pine and oak on the upland slopes, with bottomland hardwoods along the river. The St. Francois Mountains as a region are low. The highest point, Taum Sauk Mountain, reaches only 1,772 feet, but the relief is sharp, and the exposed Precambrian rock gives the landscape a texture unlike anywhere else in Missouri. From the ancient volcanic rock of the Black River, we drive a short distance north to a place where that same Precambrian granite expresses itself not in gorges, but in boulders, enormous, smooth, and piled in a way that requires an explanation. Elephant Rocks State Park sits in Iron County in the St. Francois Mountains near Graniteville. The feature the park is named for is immediately apparent. A line of massive pink granite boulders, the largest of them approximately 27 feet tall, 35 feet long, and weighing an estimated 680 tons, standing in a rough cluster on a low hilltop. They are roughly elephant-shaped, elephant-sized, and were named by locals who saw the resemblance. The comparison is apt enough that it requires no further metaphor. The granite here is Graniteville granite, part of the same 1.47 billion-year-old Precambrian igneous complex as the rhyolite at Johnson's Shut-ins. This rock type formed from magma that cooled slowly underground. The slow cooling allowed large mineral crystals to form, giving the rock its coarse-grained salt and pepper texture. The pink color comes from potassium feldspar crystals. The boulders are exfoliation features. The granite formed under enormous pressure deep in the crust, and as overlying rock eroded away over hundreds of millions of years, the pressure was released. The granite expanded and cracked in roughly concentric shells parallel to the surface, a process called pressure release jointing. Water moved into those cracks, froze, expanded, and widened them. Over time, the angular blocks weathered into rounded forms as corners eroded faster than flat surfaces. What you see now is the result of 1.5 billion years of formation and several hundred million years of surface exposure. The largest boulder in the park is named Dumbo. It has a name on the park signage. This is the plainest possible acknowledgement that the resemblance to an elephant is not a stretch. A former granite quarry operated adjacent to the park from the 1800s into the 20th century. The Graniteville Quarry produced paving stones used in St. Louis and other Midwest cities. Quarry equipment and cut stone are preserved on site. The quarrying process cut directly into the same rock formation as the boulders, and the contrast between the natural weathered surfaces and the fresh-cut quarry faces shows clearly what the granite looks like before weathering rounds its edges. The cut surfaces are gray-pink and uniformly coarse-grained. The weathered boulder surfaces are darker, stained by lichen and oxidation. Rock gnome lichen covers the boulder surfaces in gray-green patches. Eastern fence lizards inhabit the boulder field, using the rock surfaces for thermoregulation, pressing flat against the warm granite in morning sun, retreating to crevices at midday. Five-lined skinks move through the leaf litter at the boulder bases, their metallic blue tails visible in the shade. A 1-mile accessible loop trail called the Braille Trail circles the main boulder formation and includes tactile markers, one of the first such accessible nature trails developed in Missouri. The trail surface is level enough to navigate in a wheelchair across most of its length. From the ancient granite of the St. Francois Mountains, we head south and west into the deepest remaining wild river corridor in Missouri, a system of spring-fed streams that has been cutting through the Ozark Plateau since well before humans arrived. Ozark National Scenic Riverways was established in 1964 as the first national park unit created specifically to to protect a wild river system in the United States. It covers approximately 80,000 acres along 134 miles of the current river and Jacks Fork River in Shannon, Carter, Ripley, and Texas counties in the southern Ozarks. The rivers are spring-fed, cold, and clear. The current river alone receives water from more than 300 springs along its course. Big Spring, near Van Buren, discharges an average of 276 million gallons per day, one of the largest springs in the United States by average flow. The springs emerge from the same Ozark karst system that underlies the cave parks to the north. Water enters the aquifer through sinkholes on the plateau's surface, travels through dissolutional passages in the Ordovician and Cambrian-age dolomite and limestone, and reemerges where the river has cut deep enough to intersect the water table. The water temperature at emergence is 58 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, which keeps the rivers cold even in Missouri's hottest summers. The clarity is the product of the filtration. The karst acts as a slow mineral filter, stripping suspended sediment and most biological contamination from the water. You can stand chest deep in the current river and see your feet on the gravel bottom. The river corridor supports several species with limited ranges. Ozark cavefish inhabit spring openings and cave streams in the system. They are small, eyeless, depigmented, and like the cave crayfish at Onondaga, have compensated for lost vision with enhanced lateral line mechanoreception. Grotto salamanders live in cave passages throughout the drainage. Larvae are pigmented and sighted. Adults that remain in caves lose both pigment and functional eyes as they mature. Hellbenders persist in the colder tributaries. Paddlefish move through the deeper pools of the current river, a Cretaceous-era species unchanged in basic form for approximately 65 million years. They filter zooplankton through gill rakers, swimming open-mouthed with their distinctive paddle-shaped rostrum extended. They reach lengths of up to 7 feet and weights over 60 pounds in the Ozark rivers. Their numbers have declined significantly across their range due to dam construction and commercial harvest, but Ozark National Scenic Riverways supports a reproducing population. The Ozark people who lived in this valley before and after Euro-American settlement developed a material culture tightly adapted to the river and the surrounding forest. Canoe construction, grist mill operation, and float fishing, running the river in shallow wooden john boats to fish by day and camp by night, were practiced in the current river valley from the 18th century onward. Several mills survive in the park. Alley Mill at Alley Spring, built in 1894, is a 3-story frame and stone structure painted red, its wooden mill race still partially intact. The spring that powered it flows at approximately 81 million gallons per day. The mill ground corn and wheat for the surrounding rural communities until it closed in 1920. Float fishing on the current river remains a living practice. The park sees approximately 350,000 visitor days of floating per year, mostly in canoes and kayaks. The float trip tradition dates to the early 20th century, when St. Louis and Kansas City residents began traveling to the Ozarks specifically to run the rivers, one of the early examples of recreational tourism built around a river system's natural condition rather than its development potential. The campaign to establish the National Scenic Riverways Protection in the 1950s and 1960s was explicitly a response to proposals to dam the current river for flood control and power generation. The dams were not built. The river corridor in early morning carries the sound of wood thrushes from the bottomland forest, a flute-like two-part song, each phrase ending in a trembling trill. Belted kingfishers work the river edges, hovering and diving. River otters were reintroduced to Missouri streams beginning in 1982 and are now established in the current river drainage. They surface mid-river and roll back under with an unhurried ease that looks like performance but is just how they move. The Ozark National Scenic Riverways closes a loop that started at the Mississippi River in St. Louis and has moved through cave systems, prairies, volcanic mountain remnants, and Civil War river crossings to arrive at water that has been running cold and clear through this valley since before any of those events. The spring at Big Spring was flowing when the Gateway Arch was just sediment at the bottom of an inland sea. Missouri does not make a single argument. It makes several simultaneously and lets them sit next to each other without resolving the tension. Stand at the Gateway Arch, and the ground beneath you is Paleozoic limestone formed in a tropical sea. Stand at Elephant Rocks, and your hands are on 1.5 billion-year-old granite that formed at the root of a mountain range that no longer exists. The Ozarks between those 2 points are older than the Appalachians, older than the Rockies, older than almost any exposed terrain in the eastern half of the continent, and they look like gentle hills covered in oak and hickory. The age is invisible unless you know where to look. The human record layers the same way. The flint at Arrow Rock was shaped into tools 10,000 years before Bingham painted the river traders. Scott Joplin composed in a 12 by 14-foot room on Delmar Boulevard, and the music moved into every popular form that came after him. The hemp bales at Lexington were a tactical solution to a military problem, grown by enslaved people whose labor built the valley economy the soldiers were fighting over. Each of those facts is specific. None of them is resolved. Missouri does not clean up its history into a single coherent story. What it does offer is depth. The current river runs at 58 degrees because it comes out of a rock system 480 million years old. The tall grass at Prairie State Park puts roots 15 feet into the ground. The formations in Onondaga Cave grow a fraction of an inch per century. This is a place where the processes that make a landscape run slow and long and are still running. That is worth coming back to. If this journey through Missouri gave you something worth holding on to, consider subscribing to Era Trails, not for the notification, but because we are building an archive of places understood at depth. Every episode is a record. Every record adds to the map. Next, we cross into Tennessee, a state where the geology runs in diagonal ridges from northeast to southwest. The Great Smoky Mountains hold the highest biodiversity of any temperate forest in North America, and a river called the Duck runs through a valley where distilling, horse breeding, and civil rights history occupy the same few counties. The first thing we will stand on in Tennessee is Precambrian metamorphic rock, pushed up by a continental collision 300 million years before the first human being walked the Appalachian ridgeline. We will be there soon.